In the history of American crime, what happened on a cold Christmas night in 1996 is still one of the most famous riddles that has never been solved. Nothing has ever been found that can solve this puzzle. No matter what people have thought of, they have never been able to figure out this puzzle. There is still no clear answer to the question of how JonBenet Ramsey, a child beauty queen who was only 6 years old when she was found dead in her own home, died. Her death has captivated investigators, the public, and left a trail of questions that have not yet been answered. The Ramsey family was one of the wealthiest and most famous in the world. They lived in Boulder, which is in the state of Colorado. Boulder is a city in the state of Colorado. It is in the mountains of the state, with John Ramsey, his wife Patsy, and their 2 young children, Burke, 9 years old, and JonBenet, 6 years old. The Ramsey family was able to keep their home in great shape and live a happy life without any issues. JonBenet, on the other hand, was only 3 years old, while Burke was 9. Burke was the oldest of the Ramsey children, making him the oldest of the group. The person who was head of a company that specialized in computers was very successful at his job. JonBenet was already a famous child beauty queen before she was even born, thanks to her beautiful golden hair and smile. It was like this before she was born. This was already the case, even though she hadn't been born yet. The situation was already the same, even though she hadn't been born yet. A lot of people were interested in her because she was in a lot of neighborhood pageants and pictures. When the Ramseys got home late on Christmas Eve 1996, they had a great time enjoying the holiday with their friends and neighbors. They had a great time. A lot of their friends and other people they knew joined them in the party. They had a great time when they were together. From that point on, something would change in their lives that can't be undone, no matter what happened. This is something that can't be fixed. Unfortunately, Patsy Ramsey woke up on December 26th at just after 5 a.m. and saw a sign on the stairs that told her about a ransom. There was information about a ransom in the letter. There was some information in the message about the subject of the payment. For your ease, the word ransom is written below the message. It was asked for $1,180,000 in exchange for JonBenet's safe return in a letter that was 3 pages long in writing style that was very official. The letter was written in a professional style of writing. People who wrote the letter used a phrase that is usually used for business letters. The letter was written in a language that is usually used for dealing with official writing. Patsy was shocked and upset by the amount, which was the same as John's last salary. Patsy started to worry about what was going on. John's answer and Patsy's were pretty much the same. After hearing the amount, Patsy was shocked and thought it was unbelievable. It shocked her. She was scared and told 911 that her daughter had been taken because she wanted to make sure her daughter was safe. She was worried about who her daughter was. An important thing to her was the safety and well-being of her daughter. The mom was worried about her daughter because she was worried about her health. The police officers were able to get to the Ramsey home pretty quickly after they got to the scene of the crime. When they first saw the message demanding a ransom and the fact that the child had vanished without a trace, they thought it was a classic case of theft. These 2 things played a part in how they were first interpreted. That's what happened because there was a note inside that demanded a ransom be paid when it was found. Authorities in charge of law enforcement had to wait several hours before they decided to let people freely move around inside the property. This decision was made over the course of several hours, and it will be looked at in more detail in the future. On the inside of the house, the Ramseys' friends and family got together to show their support for them and to show unity with them. They cared about them and understood what they were going through because they were there. When preservation methods are used, a crime scene usually stays in perfect condition for a long time. It is important to keep proof that is related to the illegal act that was done by taking this step. But there is still a chance that it has been lost or stolen, which would mean that information that could be very important has been lost. During the whole situation, the ransom note caused a lot of misunderstanding. It was the most important thing that could have happened. It was very long, nearly 3 pages, and had words and phrases like "listen carefully" and "victory" that made me think of lines from an action movie more than a real ransom note. On top of that, it was very long. There was also something special about the length of the time. Not only was it very long, but all of this was included when it was given. An excessive amount of information for a real kidnapper was included in the message, which made some people question whether it was a real cash demand or something else. This was because the message had way too much information on it. It turned out that one of the notepads found in the Ramseys' home had a message written by hand on it at the time it was found. A friend was with John Ramsey during the investigation. During the investigation, John Ramsey decided to do his own investigation of the house before continuing with the study. It was in the afternoon when this choice was made. According to the situation, this happened because the people who were thought to have kidnapped him hadn't talked to him since the morning. The body of his daughter was found in a spare room in the basement of the house around 1 p.m. The bottom of the building had a room that could be found there. There was a room in the bottom of the building that anyone who was interested could go into. When JonBenét's body was found, it was found that he had a serious head injury as well as a wound from being strangled. The body was found first, then this was found. When he was checked out, both of these cuts were found under his torso. She was lying on the ground with duct tape over her mouth, and her hands were tied together. She was hurt very badly, with her hands behind her back. She looked like this. She had a thick layer of makeup all over her mouth. Both of her hands were bound with shackles. She was held back. Broken paintbrushes were used to make garrotons, which are simple ways to choke someone. They were found around her neck. People are choked with garrotons. Clotheslines are used to strangle someone. People are meant to choke when they wear a garrote. She had a garrote around her neck for some reason that was not clear after it was brought to light. The news was not only very upsetting for the family, but it was also very upsetting for the police officers who were investigating the case after it became public. Even though it started out as a theft case, it has now turned into a murder case. Since no suspects were found during the investigation, it became a lot more difficult to follow what was going on. It is now much harder to understand what is going on with the probe. A lot of worrying new information was found during the autopsy that was done on JonBené. This was a very worrying turn of events. Besides that, she had been choked, and the force that hit her head was very strong. Also, even if there was proof of sexual assault, it wasn't enough to figure out who was actually guilty. Even when there was proof of sexual abuse, this was still the case. There was proof, but that didn't change the fact that this was the case. While they were investigating, they found a foreign DNA sample on her clothes and under her nails. The sample contained foreign DNA. The results of their investigation were quite shocking, and they told others about them. It turned out that she had the sample on her pants. The finding proved this to be true. It turned out that no one in the family had DNA that was exactly the same as the sample being looked at. These findings were the same in every branch of the government. According to the DNA proof, someone who could not be named had gone into the building that particular time with the intention of committing the crime. The conclusion was reached because DNA proof was present. In the conversational setting, this was the hypothesis that was put forward because there were no signs of a forced entry. The detectives were unable to figure out how this unknown person got into the hospital. This made it impossible for them to figure out how the person might have gotten in. Unfortunately, this made it hard for them to find out who any of the people involved were. However, because of this, it was hard for them to figure out how the building could be used for entry. While the first question about why they would go to such great steps to leave a ransom note was more difficult to answer, this one is much more difficult to understand. Since there were no clear suspects, the investigation quickly went in a different, more controversial path. This was done because there were no clear suspects found during the probe. From the beginning of the case until it was over, the main thing that the investigators were worried about was the Ramsey family. During the event, everyone was most interested in the Ramsey family. Not only did they question the family's choice, but they also said they were worried about the logic behind their choice to call the police instead of searching the property right away. Government officials looked into a number of things, such as the strange language used in the ransom letter, the specific amount that was asked for, and the fact that the text was written on a notepad that was found at the Ramsey home. All of these things were looked into. In the beginning, it was said that JonBené had died in an accident. However, this information was later kept secret to make it look like he had been caught and taken hostage. So this is how the situation was described in the reports that were going around. To be more specific, This was the idea that was brought up for discussion. It's likely that someone in the family hurt her by accident and then created the scene to avoid taking responsibility for what they did. This makes the most sense as an answer. This is a situation that is very likely to happen. People from the public and the media got together to talk about this idea. An important number of people showed up to the event. Many people heard that the Ramseys were involved in killing their own daughter, which made people even more sure that they were to blame. The claims say that the Ramseys' own daughter killed them. The first versions of these works of writing came out in newspapers, and they have also been shown on TV networks. The family, on the other hand, says they can't be blamed and would never do anything bad to JonBenet. They say they'd never do something like that. These people say that they are completely risk-free. One of the things they say is that they would never act in that way again. They continue to stand by their claim that they are completely innocent of the charges. Along with the ideas that were already brought up, the invasion theory is also being talked about more and more often. An overwhelming number of agents and people who felt sorry for the Ramsey family believe that the crime was committed by someone who wasn't related to the Ramsey family and broke into the house to kill the family. Once the Ramsey family really thought about it, they decided that this was the best choice. It was decided that JonBenet had had physical contact with someone else because the DNA proof did not match up with any member of his family or a close friend. The above result was reached because of this. Based on this knowledge, it was found that JonBenet had sex with someone else. It was found that one of the basement windows had been left open at some point during the probe. There was some doubt, though, about whether the window had been left open on purpose while the probe was going on. The investigators were left scratching their heads because they couldn't find any other proof that would have led them to believe that the door had been forced open. For some reason, they still couldn't figure out what had happened. Because of this, they started to doubt the accuracy of the opinions they had come to. Does it seem likely that the person who killed the person was able to get into the house? If the answer is yes, what do you think the chances are that this will happen? This idea gave some people hope that the family wasn't guilty, but it didn't come up with any clear clues that could be used to figure out what was going on. It did, however, give some people hope that the family was not guilty. A thorough investigation revealed that the property did not have any unique fingerprints or tracks that seemed to have been left behind. Additionally, no neighbors had reported seeing or hearing anything that could be considered odd that particular night. After a thorough investigation, this was the conclusion that was made. The property had been carefully looked over, and this was the conclusion that was made. The journalists became more and more willing to give the police details about what was going on as the investigation went on. Every story, theory, and new piece of information that came out about the case after it was solved was told again and again in newspaper headlines, magazine covers, and news segments. No matter where the case was found, this was always done. A lot of people are interested in JonBenet's involvement in beauty pageants, and the photos of her that have been made more glamorous have started conversations about the link between child pageants and parental pressure. Some people were involved in the family cover-up movement, which made her think that her parents or maybe her brother Burke were among the criminals. Because of this event, the idea that her family was involved in the illegal action came up. Of course, for many, JonBenet's death was more than just sad news. It became something that the whole country cared about. It's because JonBenet was a great performer. Over many years, one of the most important ways that the story has been kept alive is through films and specials that have been shown on TV. This is because most people just couldn't get enough of how quickly things were changing in ways that no one could have predicted. This is the reason why this is the case. However, even though there was a lot of coverage in the media, there wasn't any real progress made in getting answers that can be called useful. An important step forward might have been made in 2008, which changed the direction of the investigation from where it had been going before. The samples that were found on JonBenet's clothes were the subject of a more thorough study than would have been possible before. In comparison to other studies that had been done before, this made sense because we now understand DNA technology better. We can reach a goal that we couldn't reach before. After the investigation was over and the results were studied, it was decided that the Ramseys were not likely to be involved in the crime. This choice was made after the Ramseys were involved in the investigation, since the alien DNA found on her clothes and under her nails was similar to that of a person who has. not been identified, it is likely that the murderer was an intruder, because the alien DNA was found on her clothes and under her nails during the investigation. This is what happened. This is because the DNA of the unknown person and the DNA of the foreign person are remarkably identical. This is the reason why this is the case. While the investigation was going on, the Boulder County District Attorney's Office said that the Ramseys were no longer suspected of any crimes, despite the fact that a good portion of the general public still had doubts about them. This was the case. The conclusion that was made after a lot of research was that the clearing did not bring any more people who were suspected of the crime to light. Even though we live in modern times, there was no way to figure out who left the DNA proof. Even though we live in the present day, this is still happening. As the years went by, the case seemed less strange, but the unanswered questions were still as puzzling as the first time they were asked. If JonBenet died because someone tried to kidnap her but failed, is it possible that her body was left in the house until it was found so that it could be found? If that's the case, this makes sense as an answer. If it is thought that she wasn't meant to be stolen, then the question that comes up is why there was a note asking for a ransom in the first place. Are you interested in finding out who the person was who left their DNA behind and kept living without being caught? It's the question of how much they identified themselves. Detectives think that the person who killed JonBenet was either a stalker or someone who had seen her act in beauty pageants and was after her because they were in a bad romantic relationship. Several agents have come up with this idea. A small group of researchers have put forward this theory as a possible reason for the event. According to the cops, this is the idea they have put forward as a possible reason. Some people think that the killer knew the family and knew how to get around the house without getting caught because of the strange events that led to the murder. The reasons for this are that there were a lot of strange things going on around the tragedy. They did this because the events leading up to the disaster were very different from anything that had ever happened before. There is still a problem with the hearing that was held for JonBenet, even though it's been more than 25 years since his terrible death. For JonBenet, the investigation was done, but it's important to note that the investigation hasn't led to the identification of any suspects, the arrest of any people, or the getting of any admissions from people. With forensic technology always getting better, there is still a chance that the DNA that was found could one day lead to a match or that new proof will be found. You can still do either of these things. It is still possible for one of these two things to happen. All of these options are being thought about right now. Because this chance exists, all of these possible outcomes are being carefully looked into right now. For now, though, JonBenet's case remains a puzzle, and her family and most people are very worried about it. Since JonBenet Ramsey's death has still not been solved, it serves as a warning of how fragile life is and how horrible things can be hidden behind even the most beautiful pictures of the Ramsey family. A lot of pictures have been taken of the Ramsey family over the years. This is especially true when you think about how the Ramsey family still hasn't been found not guilty of any crimes related to the theft. And just like similar events have not been forgotten by the world in the past, this case is not likely to be forgotten by the world either. An excellent chance exists that this case will not be lost in the present day.